Welcome again to Coastal Matters. This is a monthly show co-produced by Nantucket Community Television with the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. I'm Charlie Walters. My guest today is Jim Lentowski, who has been with the Nantucket Conservation Foundation since 1971.
Ooh, that long? It's a scary thought.
And they, of course, have land all over the island, but we're going to talk about primarily the coastal properties of the foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Charlie. It's great to be here. And to be reminded that I've been around for that long.
No, I said you were 41 years old.
Oh, thank you.
Give us an overview of the foundation for those one or two people who may not know about it.
And I'm sure they're out there. We've had a lot of recent arrivals who really don't understand what the difference between the various organizations are, but the foundation was established in 1963 as a nonprofit organization. 9 guys got together, mixture of year-round and seasonal residents who had a passion for protecting what was important to them about Nantucket. They'd come from a variety of backgrounds, some business people, some not, a couple of lawyers, and said, let's establish, before it's too late, a nonprofit organization that whose mission would be to protect land in its natural condition. And it took about 5 years before the first parcel of land was protected. In fact, it's just down the street from where we're sitting. It was 4/10 of an acre, referred to as the bird sanctuary, just down the street from the Jetties Beach. And from that, the foundation has grown over the years, the 53 years that we've been here now, having acquired about 9,000 acres total over that period of time, 75% of which has been contributed to the foundation. The remaining acreage has been purchased by the foundation, and that's only been in recent years when the value of property was so high that people couldn't rationalize giving it away. And so as a result, several landowners who were waiting for us to approach them came to us and said, is it time now? Can we talk about purchasing or selling the property to the foundation? Foundation, unlike other organizations on the island that include the Land Bank Commission and the Sconset Trust and the Mattocket Conservation Trust, Land Trust, the Land Council, although we all work together, our missions are slightly different than each other, and we're primarily protecting land in its natural condition as opposed to using it for recreation, which some organizations have a slant towards. We're about low intensity, low impact human use on the properties, about looking at the natural resources that are on the property and protecting them for the long term. One of the things that most people don't understand is that the state of Massachusetts has something on the order of 260 rare and endangered species. These have been cataloged by the Commonwealth. Of those, probably close to 225 of them exist on Nantucket. And
really?
So it's a huge it's a huge obligation that any open space landowner has to first address those issues, and we have a big science staff that does that. We have 4 year-round science staff members. We supplement that during the summer months with student interns. Always huge competition for those positions. I think this year we had 180 applications for the 3 or 4 positions that we had available. So it's a big nonprofit organization, big in numbers, big in terms of its holdings. The envy of many off-island organizations that do the same thing, just because they look at us and they say, how'd you accomplish that? And the way we accomplished it is by asking people for their support.
Now, those 9,000 acres represent about how much of Nantucket's land area?
Just shy of 30%.
30%?
Right.
And you are, I believe, the largest holder of coastal property on Nantucket.
In terms of publicly accessible coastal holdings, that's correct.
And it's about 16 miles, you said?
Yeah, about 16 of the 63 miles that represent the total edge of Nantucket, water edge of Nantucket.
So about 30% of the land on the island and about 25% of the shoreline.
Correct.
Let me switch over to your duties. You're executive director, and you've had that position almost from the day you got to the foundation.
I was the first employee.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your duties then and now.
Back then it was everything from opening the mail to thanking people for their gifts, going out and soliciting new members because we're a membership-supported organization. It grew over the years. One of the responsibilities that we took very seriously at the outset, and I'm overseen by a board of trustees. So I have an active group of 25 members who are all volunteers that serve the organization as trustees that gather a half a dozen times a year to listen to reports and to make policy decisions and to give guidance to the staff. We also have, in addition to that, about 20 people who have served multiple terms as trustees that continue to serve us as advisors. And they're a wonderful group of people because they have the long-term view of Nantucket. They've been here in some cases, they're the second or third generation of their family that have been here as seasonal residents, or we had a few native Nantucketers that served on that group. But everybody sits down periodically to give guidance to the staff. The staff then takes the instructions from the board and runs with it. And over the years, one of the top priorities has been the care of the property that's vested in our ownership, in the ownership of the organization. Taking care of it so that when people visit our properties, not only do they feel welcome, but they feel safe and they enjoy the property in a pretty pristine natural condition. Places like Sanford Farm, the Tuppence Links, the Middle Moors. Middle Moors, 3,500 contiguous acres. I mean, that's huge out there.
Well, that is huge. Let's focus on the coastal holdings. First of all, where are some of your coastal holdings? And how
Scattered,
large are they?
We probably have 25 or 30 properties that have frontage on what I would consider usable beachfront. Sandy beachfront where somebody lands in a boat or walks to it from a public way or walks across the foundation's property in order to get there. If you start thinking in terms of the geography of the island, I always start over in the Wauwinet area, just north of Wauwinet, an area called the Hallover, which was a purchase made by the foundation many years ago that has frontage both on the harbor as well as on the ocean side.
Let's talk about the Hallover for a minute, because that is so called because that's where people
some interesting
used to
history
haul
there
over their boats to get from the harbor
Right.
to the Atlantic Ocean without going all the way around Great Point. But about 125 years ago, that broke
something
through.
happened.
It broke through, yeah.
Well, and the story goes that it was the result of the boats being hauled over that very low sandy spot
Really?
that provided the avenue through which a stormwater rushed through
So
and
Coatue,
broke it open.
Cascada
Became an island.
was an island for
About
I think,
12 years.
12 years.
And it was only after that beach from the Wauwinet end, from the south side of that opening, migrated toward the north as longshore currents continued to take sand and deposit it in the opening, that it finally came in contact with the headland at Cascada and closed the hole up.
And it looks somewhat substantial now. I guess it washes over during bad storms, but it's a
not at the Hallover, further north, up at the Galls,
Okay.
just north of Cascada.
But where the Hallover is, that's not in danger as we speak, anyway,
Not presently.
of getting washed over
Right.
again.
But Nantucket's shorelines are, they're very dynamic.
Well, it's an island, so
And I have to remind everybody that we were laid down here by a glacier about 15,000 years ago. That glacier created some interesting conditions, one of which, because sea level was so much lower than it is today, it was about 300 feet lower than it is today, Nantucket's south shore was 45 miles further south than it is today. So when people get concerned about eroding shorelines, you have to look at it in the historical perspective and say,
it's nothing new.
this has been going on for thousands, literally thousands of years. And so as sea level continues to rise, Nantucket is getting smaller and smaller by the day.
Now, the largest area of Conservation Foundation owned shoreline is Coatue.
A very interesting system. I had the privilege back when I arrived of meeting a fellow by the name of Peter Rosen, who has just completed a career as a professor at Northeastern University in Boston. And Peter, for his master's degree, which he was taking at UMass Amherst, which is where I'm from, where I graduated from, was a geology student there and chose to study the dynamics that created that what's referred to as a cuspate shoreline, that scalloped shoreline that is Nantucket's north side, or Nantucket Harbor's north side, which is now owned by the foundation. And that was in part because of winds, the prevailing winds during the summer months, which are southwest, and they accumulate sand on the west side of the points, and that northwest wind that blows during the winter season, which extends those points out into Nantucket Harbor. But there is all sorts of stuff going on out there, and there have been, in my history here on the island, occasions where a very strong winter storm doesn't breach the beach, but overwashes the beach. And that's part of the dynamics of a coastal shoreline, a sandy shoreline as we are. I mentioned that the glacier deposited Nantucket during that period 12 to 15,000 years ago. What it dropped here was all sand and light stone. You'll find an occasional large boulder, which we refer to as a glacial erratic. But one of the curious pieces of research that happened almost as soon as I arrived, this was a plan done by the U.S. Geological Survey, was to determine how far was it below the surface of the island before they hit bedrock. Bedrock, most people come from areas in the Northeast, whether it's the Maine coast or even downtown Manhattan, where they're standing on rock that is part of the earth. It's solid rock from that point into the magma of the center of the earth. On Nantucket, we're sitting on a layer of rock that is 1,600 feet below us. And everything above that is sand.
Like you see at the kind of sand you see at the beach.
Correct. And so people wonder why we're moving around. Well, the forces of the ocean, and most people only visit Nantucket, or they're here during the summer months when the ocean waters are fairly calm. Come back in February and March, as you know, where you can stand on that south shore and see waves that are 12 to 15 feet high attacking the shoreline and doing a little rearranging of what we're otherwise used to. When you come here in the summer, you enjoy a fairly flat beach that's usually quite wide from the edge of the vegetated edge of the island out to the edge of the water. During the winter, that beach steepens, and as a result, the beach gets very narrow, and the wave action is able to come in and start chewing away at the headland.
I remember noticing that back in the 60s, coming out to the Cisco Beach, which you now own, in April or May, and I'm thinking, where's the beach? Go back in June, and there it is again,
well,
as you say.
Cisco Beach was actually owned back when I arrived by the foundation, and that had already been used as a public bathing beach. We realized that we weren't in the recreation business, but for lack of anybody else to manage the area, we took it upon ourselves to manage it in a more responsible way than it had been used back then. And back then, the tradition was that all the Jeepsters, anybody that had a four-wheel drive vehicle, would drive right to the face of the bluff, turn the radio up as loud as they could, go down to the beach and spend the afternoon listening to their radio, which is up on top of the bluff. As a result, not only because of the abuse that the surface of the ground there and the vegetation that was trying to grow on it, not only as a result of that, but also because when the glacier melted away, it formed layers of sand that washed southward off into the ocean, and there was a slight slope there. So every time it rained, all the loose material, the material that had been loosened up by the wheels of the cars or the tires of the cars that were parked up in the Cisco Beach parking lot, would wash over the face of the bluff. And then the bluff itself was eroding away, so we had these huge gullies. One of the first actions we took was to move the parking lot back so that people would have to walk from the parking lot area across a boardwalk that we established through the vegetation that was still left, and then they got down to the beach. All hell broke loose. People didn't like the idea that they couldn't park right on the face of the bluff. Well, not only did we insist that they continue to follow that by installing fencing, we also planned for the eventual retreat. And I'm a big map person, Google Earth person, constantly looking at aerial photography, and just recently looked at some of the old lines that I established back in the early 70s that are still visible in the ground out there because the parking lot has been relocated as we expected it would have to be. The same thing has taken place out at the head of the plains where the foundation has major shoreline holdings there. We just, over this past winter, had to relocate several of the parking lots, and it's always done with regard given to the fact that shoreline erosion in those areas is going to continue. And if you look at the average retreat of that shoreline, we make a decision, an educated decision, that we want the new road location or the new parking lot location to last 10 years before it has to be done again. And so we will relocate the road that far back from the shoreline or the parking lot that far from the shore.
We've been talking about beaches primarily so far, but what about a piece of land like Little Neck, which is a different kind of a landscape from a dune and beach landscape? What sorts of issues do you have out there?
Actually, the Little Neck property,
Which is in Mattocket for those who don't know.
there's a little parking lot past the boatyard in Mattocket down on our Little Neck property, which gets heavily used at all seasons of the year. During the summer, sailors use it to bring their sunfish and sailfish up on the beach. During the winter season, there's scalloping access that happens there. But from that parking lot to the southernmost tip of Little Neck, which is quite a distance, about a half-mile long, there's very little opportunity there for four-wheel drivers to get onto the beach. We don't encourage that. And as a result, it's very light pedestrian use that goes down, and because it goes from a sandy beach to a mucky beach, because that's a big salt marsh area, an important salt marsh area. It's right at the head of where Hither Creek comes out into Mattocket Harbor. That's been somewhat self-maintaining over the years.
Let's go back to your background. You studied at UMass Amherst. What did you study?
I was a landscape architect. I studied my undergraduate degrees in landscape architecture. I took a bachelor's degree, which was what they referred to back then as a pre-professional degree, but as a landscape architect, I was taking lots of sciences. So I took the usual, the chemistry, the botany, the biology, the plant and soil sciences, agronomy, I mean, a whole range of stuff. And then I had a crossroads to go through when I was considering my graduate program, and decided rather than my department was a Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning, and we had part of the student body went off and became planners, and part of them went off and became landscape architects, and that's the path that I chose because I was not one that wanted to study and put together a plan and have it put up on the shelf and have nothing to happen with it. So landscape architecture was a more, not immediate satisfaction, but it was something that in most cases when clients employed you, they employed you because they wanted to get something done. It was shortly after that when I got out of graduate school, that the head of my department and I had a chance meeting in Amherst, and he said, I was just thinking of you because I know you were interested in Nantucket. I had come here as a Boy Scout originally, and it made a huge impression on me. Living for a weekend, we had 2 very rainy weekends out at Camp Richards, which is still out there, and living in the Quonset hut because we were getting soaked, driving out that mile-long sandy road on the old black English 3-speed bicycles and, wondering, what am I doing here? Well, it made such an impression that I had an opportunity while I was in grad school to come back here and actually spent a week out at the UMass Field Station. And the irony of that is that many years later, the foundation had the opportunity to purchase that property, and we just finished the acquisition of that property maybe 10 years ago now. It was a very expensive purchase on our part, but it was an important property which we felt that should continue to be preserved as open space and should continue to have some university programming on it. But anyway, long story short, when I found out about the position here on Nantucket, which was, as I mentioned earlier, it was the first hire of the foundation. Prior to that time, it was all a volunteer effort on the part of the founding trustees and a few other people who felt strongly that Nantucket had to get going in protecting land because there was no such effort going on at that time. And now we have not only the foundation, but fortunately the Land Bank Commission, which has the resources from the 2% transfer tax to work with, and they've been a long-time conservation partner with us. The Sconset Trust, the trustees of reservations are active here on Nantucket. That's a statewide organization. Mass Audubon Society is active here on the island and holds property. So together, all of us, today we're probably on the order of about 45% of the land area of the island has been protected.
You and I came here year-round in the same year. And
it was very quiet back then.
Yes, it was.
No cable television.
And the antennas didn't do much good.
I can remember starting to watch a program, and then as the fog came in, the program went out.
Yeah. Well, it's an obvious enough question, but I'm hoping you can give us a twist on it. We all know how many changes there have been on Nantucket in the last 45 years. But in terms of the foundation, aside from the obvious things like there's more property and so on, what do you see from your standpoint as some of the biggest changes that people may not think about right away?
Boy, that's a challenge. I think the diversity of the community is one of them.
But in terms of the foundation?
In terms of the foundation, it's the pressure on the land. There are more people on the island, and thus there are more people out looking for opportunities in open space. The beaches certainly get much more impact than they had in the past. Places like Coatue on a great summer day, you can look across. I don't get out there often, but you can look across the harbor and see boat after boat after boat lined up on the beach out there. The oversand vehicle permit allows for regulated use of regulated access to the areas north of Wauwinet all the way out to Great Point and down the length of Coatue, and that's certainly heavily used. But the nice thing about it is that we trained people. I can remember when we first instituted the sticker program for driving the beach to Coatue. The first year it was a complimentary permit, and it was only effective on Coatue. Trustees of reservations hadn't yet acquired their property at Cascada and Great Point. And the second year we charged $5, and it was like, I can remember many people asking me, you really think that people are going to pay for the privilege of going out there?
Even just $5?
$5. Well, not that it wasn't an insignificant amount of money back in the 70s, but you know, a six-pack costs $5. So, and a tank of gas.
A lot less than that, as I recall.
Oh, Peels, yes. Bert and Harry sure are fine selling 6 for $99.
That's right. I remember it well. Jim Lentowski, thanks very much for joining
Charlie,
me today.
it's been a great pleasure, and just want to encourage your viewers that if they have any questions, give us a call at the office or go on our website. There is a trove of information there, and we've got brochures on most of our properties that are popular with the public, including the shorefront properties.
Good. Thanks for putting that in.
Terrific.
For Coastal Matters, I'm Charlie Walters. Thank you for joining me, and please tune in again next time.